Now, back to the referendum campaign itself, which is becoming increasingly ugly and hostile to anyone asking questions or, as we saw with Dutton, daring to tell the truth. Now, one of the worst comments by the Yes campaign came from the referendum working group member Noel Pearson. It was prompted by former Liberal frontbencher Julian Leeser, who had asked how Aboriginality would be defined for Voice members. This was Pearson's response.
You know, I first heard the opposition spokesman Julian Leeser say that, Anna, and I was just completely confounded by it. Because I'm wondering whether Julian expects us to wear a tattoo identifying ourselves as Indigenous. Is that what he's saying? Or that our clothes should be adorned with some kind of badge identifying us as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander? I think it's a completely dangerous idea and suggestion and extremely offensive.
Someone was being extremely offensive, but it wasn't Julian Leeser.
It's an extraordinary analogy for anyone to use any time, but especially given that you're Jewish. What's your response to Noel Pearson's claims there?
I was very disappointed in Noel's claims. He made those remarks during Passover. In fact, the time he was making those remarks, I was taking my son to the synagogue. That's not the sort of debate we should be conducting. I think it's important that those people who are advocating yes do understand the concerns and queries of people who doubt, and that's certainly how I'll be conducting myself in this referendum campaign.
Activist anger has only intensified since opposition leader Peter Dutton announced last week the Liberal Party would campaign against the Voice. The onus is now on the Albanese government to persuade Australian voters his model is best. If it doesn't succeed, then Labor is to blame. But already, some in the media are writing the lost cause narrative.
Peter Dutton, no referendum has succeeded in the past without bipartisan support. Have you wrecked the chances of this one succeeding?
Well, Sabra Lane, it wouldn't have anything to do with a government that refuses to release the Solicitor General's legal advice about the proposed model, or hold a constitutional convention, or to fund yes and no cases, or even answer basic questions about the Voice composition, would it? And then Lane resorted to this trite emotional appeal.
Are you happy to be blamed for this? You boycotted the national apology to the stolen generations, and 15 years later you admitted that was a mistake. What happens if you've made another mistake and you end up on the wrong side of history again with the referendum?
And then we had this from the ABC's political editor, Andrew Probyn.
That said, Labor will have to be a lot more nimble in its advocacy for the Voice to prevent a Dutton-led no campaign undermining the national goodwill.
And 7:30 host Sarah Ferguson seemed to state as a fact that Dutton was deriding Indigenous Australians in a manner which was disturbing.
Does it disturb you that Peter Dutton is using the language that he's using to deride the national voice? Are you concerned he's going to be constantly repeating these claims between now and the referendum?
I support Peter Dutton's leadership 100%. I've travelled with him to remote communities.
Yes, I think let's come back to my question, though. He's made a number of statements about the Voice. He's derided it as being made up of, going to be made up of, elites, academics, a Canberra voice, as if that were an insult. My question is, are you concerned about the kind of language he's using to describe the Voice? Well, and Sarah, if so, will you talk to him about it?
These pathetic so-called academics need to toughen up. You do not get to change the Constitution without a debate. And the act of debating and probing is not offensive. I cannot believe I need to make that point to journalists. And even the commercial stations were spruiking nonsense.
Is this a knee-jerk reaction to the right of politics after you cop such a battering at the Aston by-election?
No, mate, no, not at all.
And while we've seen our share of loaded questions in this debate, we had to take our hats off to 10 host Narelda Jacobs for the one she sent the way of opposition frontbencher Dan Tehan.
Proponents of the Uluru Statement will say that everything you've said is completely untrue, that the Solicitor General, while we haven't seen the legal advice that they've provided, say that everything about the statement and about the proposed changes is above law and it won't cause any legal issues down the track, that your proposal, or that what you've said, that it being a Canberra voice is also untrue because they're going to be elected members of First Nations across the country, so it will in fact be grassroots. So what was it like in the party room yesterday, knowing that there are numerous supporters of The Voice, some on the front bench who are directed to now oppose The Voice? Why not allow the front bench a conscience vote?
Credit to Toughen, though, for calling her out on these premises, not that he was allowed to get very far.
This is the biggest change to our constitution. We are adding a chapter that's been made in over 100 years.
Dan, you've got
now,
High Court judges saying that there are going to be no legal issues.
And then you've got other High Court judges saying that there will be. You've got other very learned counsels
We don't have much time, so I wanted to ask you a few more questions.
Caroline, what have you made of, I guess, the state of the debate for The Voice? Do you think, like I think, that it has become too nasty and risks alienating mainstream Australians who are uncertain about how to vote?
I think so. And the thing we ultimately have to remember here and have to be a bit careful about is the Constitution, you know, it's the structure of our system. It's about jurisdiction. It's about powers. It's about, you know, it's about those sorts of things. It's meant to be a working document, right? It's meant to help us function. It's not a book of cuddles. This isn't about cuddles. Quit with the emotional blackmail. It is so unhelpful to the discussion. And look, the emotional blackmail doesn't work on me. Jack, I have an Italian mother. I've been dealing with it for years. So it goes straight over. I'm totally desensitized. But for other people, you know, they're being made to feel bad that if they disagree, it makes them a bad person. No. Just deal with the debate, deal with the matter on the merits. We should be having a dispassionate discussion about this. The comments made by Noel Pearson in particular about Julie and Lisa were just absolutely abysmal. And now, what I would say to that is, well, when we go to vote in a normal election, in a garden variety election, you need to be an Australian citizen. That doesn't mean any of us have a tattoo. That doesn't mean our clothing is adorned. That just says that we are a certain group of people who have the right to vote. No doubt in the Voice, if there is going to be a right to vote to pick, well, then it has to be clear who has that right to vote and who doesn't. It doesn't extend any further than that. And what I'd really like to know from Narelda Jacobs is is she going to ask members of the Labor government whether Labor are going to have a conscience vote? Because we all know the answer, that anyone who disagrees in the Labor Party, they have to keep very quiet, otherwise they get expelled.
Well said. Tim Blair, your thoughts?
Two thoughts. One, Noel Pearson is one of Australia's greatest orators. His voice is an enormously potent instrument, but he's diminishing it not just with the content of what he's saying, but also in the manner in which he's presenting things. He sounds like sometimes like a teenage girl. He's become an uptalker, if you notice, and everything sounds like it's a question. Now, this is not the way. This is not the Noel Pearson of previous years. So he sounds a slightly diminished entity in that regard. Secondly, the left aren't learning here. Whenever the left presents a case for a vote as good versus bad, the Republic vote, the 2016 Trump election, the election, I guess, of Morrison in 2019, the left often lose these because people are not inclined to be lectured. As Caroline was pointing out, we're done with being morally and emotionally blackmailed. It perhaps might be the most damaging thing in their attempt to get this vote up.
Well said. Do Australians want to give more power to people that refuse to debate?